Neurons, or nerve cells, are the basic cells that make up the nervous system. And just like the cells in our lungs are specialized for breathing and our red blood cells are specialized for carrying oxygen, neurons are specialized for communication. They help us take in information from the outside world, process it in the brain or in the spinal cord, and then send messages from our brain or spinal cord to the rest of our body to tell it what to do. And like all the other cells in our body, neurons have a nucleus and mitochondria and all the other organelles. But there are also several things that make neurons unique. First of all, we have what are called the dendrites. And these are branching structures at the beginning of neurons. And they branch out like trees and receive messages from other cells. So these are the dendrites. The next part of our cell is our cell body, or our soma. And this is the part of the neuron that contains the nucleus and all the other organelles that you might remember from back in biology class. And if the dendrites are collecting information, the cell body is where that information is summated, or where it comes together. The next part of our neuron is this really long portion, which is referred to as the axon. And this is how the neuron reaches out to communicate with other neurons or other cells. So after a neuron receives a message from a previous cell on the dendrites, that message comes together in the cell body and then travels down the axon in the direction of the next cell. And one neat thing about axons is that they can either be really short, like the ones going from neuron to neuron in your brain, or they can be incredibly long, like the axons that go all the way from your spinal cord to your big toe. At the end of the axon, which is sometimes called the axon terminal or the terminal buttons, we have these short branches. And this is the part of the neuron that allows it to communicate with another cell. So imagine for a moment that there's another cell on this side, and that it has axon terminals that are ending on the dendrites of our cell. And this is how our dendrites listen to messages from other cells. At the same time, the axon terminals from our cells probably meet up with dendrites from other neurons. So this is the axon terminal. I want to point out one more really important part of the neuron before we move on, and that's something that's referred to as myelin. If you were to look at this neuron underneath a microscope, you would see that this axon isn't bare. Instead, it would look like it was covered in beads that run down the length of the axon. And this is a layer of fatty tissue called the myelin sheath that acts as insulation, and it helps the neuron to quickly conduct a message down an axon. There's a whole lot more that can be said about exactly what kind of message travels down a neuron, and exactly how one neuron communicates with another. But these are all things that we'll save for future videos. One thing that you should keep in mind, though, is that the signal always moves in one direction. Our dendrites are listening for messages from neurons or other cells or the environment. When it hears enough of those messages, it's summed up as we move past the soma, and then moves to the axon, and this first part of an axon is sometimes referred to as the axon hillock. At that point, the signal can move down the axon towards the terminal buttons, which reach out to communicate with other cells.